Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to crack open the story behind one of France's most iconic delicacies. It's a true concentrate of the ocean, served right there in a half shell. Yeah, just let that sink in for a minute. Oysters. They hold this totally unique place in the culinary world for one fascinating and maybe a little unsettling fact. They're a direct, living taste of the ocean. So what exactly is the story in that half shell? Well, it's a story that's all about geography, a bit of natural alchemy, and a really heated debate that pits centuries of tradition squarely against modern science. All right, first up, the anatomy of an oyster. To really get what makes one oyster different from another, you've got to know this one crucial word. It's a concept the French call miroir. So you've probably heard of terroir when it comes to wine, right? That sense of place you can taste from the soil, the climate. Well, think of miroir as its oceanic twin. It's this idea that an oyster doesn't just live in the sea, it literally tastes of a very specific patch of it. We're talking its currents, its minerals, its own unique blend of plankton. And to really wrap our heads around miroir, we've got to explore France's two most iconic oyster cultures. And guess what? They're defined by two very different species of oyster. Yeah, the French oyster world, it's really a tale of two species. On one hand, you've got the workhorse, the rugged, ruffled, cupped oyster. It's actually a Japanese import that, get this, saved the entire industry. And then you have the aristocrat, the native, perfectly round, flat oyster, which is celebrated for this incredibly delicate, almost nutty flavor. Okay, and this is where miroir really comes to life. Look at these two main regions. In Marennes-Oloron, the magic is all about the finishing process. They use these special ponds, but over in Brittany and places like Cancale and the Blone River, they're relying on the raw power of nature. We're talking some of the most extreme tides in all of Europe and a unique, invisible prairie of algae on the seafloor. All of that forges the oyster's character. So let's zoom in on Marennes-Oloron for a second, because what they do there, it's less like farming and honestly more like alchemy. It's this incredible art form called affinage. Seriously, think of affinage as the oyster's personal finishing school. So after spending years out in the rough, open sea, they get moved into these calm, shallow clay ponds called clairs. And fun fact, these are actually repurposed ancient salt marshes. In this controlled environment, the oysters just relax. They purge any impurities and develop this much subtler, more refined flavor. And here's where it gets a little magical. There's this specific microalga, the navicule blue, that just thrives in these ponds. It produces a blue pigment, and when the oyster filters it through its system, that blue combines with the natural yellow of its gills, and boom, you get this beautiful, really prized shade of green. How cool is that? And believe me, you can truly taste the results of all this work. The French have even codified it with official classifications. It's all based on something called a flesh index, which is really just a fancy way of saying how plump the oyster is. So this creates a whole spectrum, from the delicate fine de clair all the way up to the poussin clair. And that one, it's so special they call it the Bugatti of the sea. But the story of the French oyster isn't just about ancient tradition. Oh no. It's also about a fierce, modern-day controversy that pits nature right up against scientific nurture. Okay, so right at the heart of this whole debate is something called the triploid oyster. Now, this is really important. It is not a GMO. It's created in a hatchery by influencing reproduction, which results in an oyster with 3 sets of chromosomes instead of the usual 2. And what that does essentially is make it sterile. So, here's the big trade-off. For the farmers, the benefits are huge, right? You get a faster-growing oyster that's delicious all year round because it never gets milky in the summer. But the critics, they're raising some really serious concerns. We're talking about dependency on just a handful of specialized labs, a potential loss of genetic diversity, and the fear that these oysters are just less resilient when nature throws a curveball, like a sudden heat wave. And you have to understand, this debate is deeply personal for the oyster farmers themselves. So many of them feel caught right in the middle, between upholding centuries of tradition and the sheer economic necessity of adopting this new tech just to survive in a really challenging market. So, what does all of this mean for you, the person who's about to sit down and enjoy a dozen? Well, let's look at both the incredible health benefits and the potential risks of eating oysters. Okay, let's start with the payoff.
That massive number, that represents the percentage of your daily recommended zinc you can get from just a single 100-gram serving of oysters. No joke. They are an absolute powerhouse of zinc, and that mineral is just so critical for a healthy immune system.
And hey, it's not just zinc. They are absolutely packed with other essential micronutrients. You've got vitamin B12 for energy, you've got copper, iron, and those amazing heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids. And all of that comes in a super low-calorie package. But of course, there are perils, and that's mainly because we eat them raw. The main risks really fall into two big categories. First, norovirus. This can contaminate oyster beds if heavy rains cause sewage systems to overflow. Then there's Vibrio bacteria. This stuff occurs naturally in warm coastal waters, and it can also cause illness, especially if you have a compromised immune system. All of this really brings us to a much larger point, because oysters are constantly filtering seawater for food. We're talking up to 5 liters an hour. They act as a kind of living barometer for the health of our oceans. You could even call them sentinels of the sea. And that amazing filter feeding ability, well, it means they accumulate not just the good stuff, the nutrients, but also pollutants from the water. They can concentrate pretty much everything, from heavy metals and pesticides, all the way to the microplastics and harmful algae that are, let's face it, becoming more and more common in our coastal waters. So the next time you see an oyster sitting there on the half shell, I want you to consider this. Are you just looking at a simple delicacy? Or are you looking at a dispatch straight from the front lines of our changing oceans? It's just a powerful reminder that what we eat is so deeply connected to the world around us. It's a complex messenger, all wrapped up in a simple, beautiful shell.